not so much listen to me, but to try to catch a glimpse of your voice and my words. We know this story so well. Help us to hear it again through this reflection with new ears, that we might take something from this day and put it into context in our lives in such a way that we become something closer to the people that you would have us all be. We ask this in your Son's name. Amen. Tag, you're it. When I hear those three little words, something deep in me harkens back to a day when I was full of energy and exuberance. So that's a long time ago. When I was young, when I would gladly drop anything else that I was doing to join in a game of tag. Do you remember what it was like to have that kind of energy when you wanted nothing more than to tear around after somebody or have them tear after you? I have to admit that today, as a fairly sedentary year-old, who's a bit of a couch potato, it would do me a world of good to play a good game of tag once in a while. Now, tag is really a childishly simple game without many rules. There's no need for equipment, there's no need for a special playing field, and anyone can decide when it's time for a game of tag. Tag is always in season. You can play a game of tag with virtually anyone, virtually anywhere. Now, one thing about the game of tag, though, is you can't play it by yourself. Unless there's someone else to tag, and unless the person who was tagged is willing to make the effort and tag somebody else, the game dies. It just stops. The tagger needs somebody else to tag, to pass the game along, to keep it going. The game demands that once tagged, the tag becomes the next tagger, and so on. And I want to remind us all, in a really good game of tag, the fastest, the most mobile players will put themselves in positions that make it possible for the less quick players to have a shot at tagging them. I mean, come on, it's no fun to play in a lopsided game where those with all the advantages just run circles around the rest. I want you to imagine how disappointing it would be to be an enthusiastic and energetic tagger and to run up to someone and to shout, "Tag, you're it," and to have that person say, "Oh, thank you," and then to just go quietly about their business without ever tagging somebody else, without trying to pass the game along. Or to run up to somebody in that same way and to say, "Tag, you're it," and to have that person say, "Shh, be quiet. Someone might hear you. Shh, someone might find out that you're trying to play tag." You see, that could very well have been the way that the story of the resurrected Jesus Christ came to an end. Just like that. Tag, you're it. Shh. Don't let anybody know. As we heard in our reading today from Mark, our oldest of the gospel accounts, the Easter morning story, as Mark first wrote it down. A young man in a white robe said to a trio of women, in effect, "Tag, you're it." When he said, "Go, tell the disciples." And then it goes on. So they went quickly and fled from the tomb, for they trembled and were amazed, and they said nothing to anyone. the way that the story ended. For a time. And here's the thing. Biblical scholars will tell us that for a time, at least, that's the way the gospel account of Mark ended. That's how the story ended. The oldest surviving copies of the book of Mark end by saying, and they told no one, for they were afraid. Subsequent, later copies, we start to find more of those concluding verses that we find in our modern editions of the Bible. So that young man in white tagged the women with the news that Jesus was no longer trapped by death in the tomb, and he said, "You're it," when he told them that they were going to have to keep the game going by tagging Peter and the rest of the disciples with the news. And at least for a while, we need to remember it was possible that that game of tag would end right there. God had raised Jesus from the dead. God had sent a messenger to relay the news to the women. And maybe no one else would ever hear about it, because they said nothing to anyone. They were afraid. Now, if you will, I want you to go with me back for a few minutes through the ministry of Jesus Christ, and we're going to look at it with tag as a metaphor as we go through that ministry. So the gospel accounts tell us that God tagged his own son. Tagged his son and said, "You're it. You're the one that I've chosen to save my people. You're the one that needs to put this game into play." And Jesus said, "Game on." And he started this game of tag. Jesus first tagged some fishermen. And he said to them, "You're it." Now here's one of the brilliant things about the way that Jesus played the game of tag that's different than the way other people play it. There can be more than one person who's it. Right? Clearly, Jesus was it. But he said to the disciples, "You can be it too. Go and tag people." And the people that they tagged were also it. And that's how this particular game of tag spread. Jesus said, "I'm starting a new version of an old game, and anyone can play. And the main rule is that you love everyone the way that God loves you, even your enemies." And those 12 ragtag fishermen said, "Wow, we're not sure we understand that completely, but we like the way you play this game. And we want to try to play it as well as you do. So count us in." And Jesus and his 12 taggers went out into the village, the countryside, and they tagged others. And they said to them, "God loves you and wants you to love others and to not live in fear." Tag, you're it. And those villagers ran out and they told others that there was a new game in town and that God was speaking and acting and healing through this radical gamester, Jesus. And they'd say, "If you get the chance, you've got to see him. You've got to hear him for yourself. Tag, you're it. Spread the word." And this new game just spread like wildfire. And belief in the one who started it, this radically loving game, this Jesus, who was clearly the best player anybody had ever seen, belief in the divinity that was in him grew and spread as more and more people said, "I have been touched by something that is out of this world. My life will never be the same. I want you to have the same blessing that I've received. I want you to have a Jesus experience too. Come with me to meet him. Tag, you're it. And by the time this boisterous and energetic game and its star player reached the capital city in Jerusalem, the powers that be there were afraid. The popularity of this new game of tag threatened and undermined their authority as the sanctioning body of the official God game at the time. See, the officially sanctioned God game had become something more like keep away than this game of tag that Jesus was playing. And this game of keep away was 180 degrees out of sync with this new, simpler, freer, inspiring version of tag that Jesus was playing. The Roman government played their own version of keep away that said only the rich and the powerful could be blessed by God. And the Jerusalem religious version said that only the most perfect and carefully rule-abiding players could be blessed by God. Jesus and his egalitarian game of tag, open to anyone to play, forgiving rule breakers, threatened those power and authority referees and owners of franchises, if you will. So they vowed to shut down this game of tag. And they were going to sideline the star player forever. And we know how that played out. The betrayal, the mock trial, the torture, cross, brutal death on that cross, and then the finality of the tomb. They shut down Jesus. And they put an end to this life-affirming game of tag, striking fear into everybody who'd been playing that game, saying, in effect, if we catch you playing this game, the same thing's going to happen to you. We killed the captain of this game of yours, and we'll kill you too. So, when those three brave and faithful women came to the tomb to care for Jesus' body on that Sunday morning after that gruesome crucifixion, they, like everyone else, thought that the Jesus movement was over. That loving and healing and empowering game of tag that God had set into play through Jesus and his followers had been banned, it had been squelched, it was now cold and dead and sealed in that tomb along with Jesus. No more of this grace and inclusion. The old game of keep away was secure, once again, the official God game. Surely no one would ever again dare to say, I believe Jesus is the truth. God loves everyone. Tag, you're it. No, Jesus' game of tag was over. No one would dare come out and play. But then, this young man in white did just that. He said to the women, the game is on. Tag, you're it. And I think in that moment, the whole company of heaven collectively held its breath to see if Mary and the other women were going to keep the game going. God had done his part, but now it was up to humanity to move that message forward and spread the news. And just think how horrible it would be for all of us today and everyone who's lived since if they'd simply kept this good news for themselves and not risk telling the others. Those oldest surviving copies of the Gospel of Mark remind us that that was a very real possibility. It could have ended right there. Too afraid, too amazed. I'll just keep this to myself, they might have said. Maybe somebody else will tell the others. In John's Gospel, it's Jesus himself who says to Mary, "You're it. You are the one that must move this game forward." Just as the very human, earthbound Jesus needed others to help spread the news about his radical game, the resurrected Jesus told Mary that he needed her to breathe life into this now dead game that he'd started, just as God had breathed life back into him. And thank God that she responded, "Game on," and did eventually spread that news to the disciples. And thank God that so many across the centuries have likewise accepted this honor of being tagged it, and then tagging others, moving the game forward. Now, on this Easter morning, 2019, here's the plain and sorry truth about this game of tag that Jesus started. This Jesus movement. It's ebbing. The Jesus movement is ebbing. People are increasingly reluctant to play tag with Jesus and his team. And we just have to confess that a lot of the blame for this lies with us church people. We've simply forgotten how to play the game the way that Jesus gave it to us. There's a bunch of us, most of us will fit in this, mainline Protestant Christianity, who quite frankly have gotten fat and lazy. We've forgotten the thrill of playing tag. We're no more willing to get out there and run around with people than I am to get off my couch. We've settled for something that's more like a game of hide and seek, where we're hidden in our churches and we hope that people seek us out and find us in here. And if they do find us, we hand them our book and we say, "Christ is risen. Here, read about it." And so while most of us mainliners have forgotten that zeal of sharing our first-hand experiences, having been touched by the hand of a resurrected Christ, and the ways that we see him working in our daily lives, there's a whole other wing, if you will, of the Jesus movement, and that wing has retained the zeal. They are not too tired. They are not too afraid to share their personal testimonies of the way that Christ is alive and walking with them on a daily basis. But here's the thing. So many in that wing have also forgotten something about the way Jesus played this game. So very often, these very zealous believers who are so ready to tag people for Jesus, they do so in such a way that distorts the image of Jesus for the rest of the world, leading with judgment rather than grace, practicing exclusion instead of inclusion, and proclaiming very loudly all the people that God hates, instead of the fact that God loves all people. So is it any wonder that the Jesus movement is on the ebb? I mean, just look at what the body of Christ has become. Half of us is too tired, no fun to play with. The other half, very energetic, but too rough. Not careful enough of who gets hurt as we chase after them. game of tag becoming something more like a shoving match, in fact. We've got to remember, the way Jesus played this game of tag, people welcomed the touch of his hand as he tagged them. Today, sometimes it's a little more like an overly competitive schoolyard game of tag, where a lot of people are ducking and diving and hiding if they see a Christian coming to tag them, because they're leery about what that touch is going to be like. Can you see how desperately Jesus needs us to get back in the game he started, playing the way he played, this game of tag that he started? Because the fact is, a broken-hearted world is waiting to be tagged with love. The guilty world needs to be tagged by grace. A hurting and ailing world yearns to be tagged by a healing hand. And the hungry and thirsty world is literally dying to be tagged by a generous hand. So what do you say? Should we do our part to keep this game moving forward? Jesus still needs players who are willing to be it for him. Are you willing to play the game by his rules? Some of us need to remember that means we might have to break a sweat. Jesus said that there was one way that people will know that we are really playing his game. There's one way that people will know if we're really on his team, playing by his rules. And that's by the way that we love one another. Repeat this for me, if you would. The love of God will not remain buried. The love of God will not remain buried. He is risen.
He is risen.
Now turn and tag somebody near you and say, tag, you're it. There's a bunch of people outside the doors of this place who need to play this game with us. Right? You can start a game of tag anywhere, at any time, with anybody. You carry your own version of that little gold cross with you. It's appropriate to hand it to them and say, God loves you. Amen. All right. We're going to sing our hymn of invitation at this point. And for our guests, the invitation that's extended here, the invitation that's extended here is the standard invitation that church has extended. If you've never made a public profession of faith and you'd like to do that, if you're interested in being baptized, if you care to join this church as a member of our church family, you can come forward while we sing, and we would celebrate that. That'd be a highlight in the life of the church. That's a lot to ask, especially with first-time visitors. But if it's something that anybody is interested in, please find a green card that's in the pew. Make a note of that, and we'll have a conversation with you. All right. Let's open our hymnals. Let's turn to hymn number 234. We're going to sing all verses, not one, but all verses of Crown Him with Many Crowns. Let's stand and sing.